Hello, coaches. Welcome to week 7, Principles of Coaching and Leadership, MCAA 510. This is Coach Richardson. We're going to be talking about effective communication, specifically within sport. It's going to be a little bit coach heavy, and I will pepper in some administrative or peer-to-peer insight as relates to the administrative side of communicating or being an effective communicator within sport. So as we get started, effective communication in sport, you need to know your audience, and we're going to go through that, how we talk to our athletes, who our athletes are, and what they're dealing with, and also as it relates to how we perceive ourselves and others, and how that affects our level of communication. We're going to talk about the types of messages. When we send messages, I'm going to go through verbal, nonverbal, direct, indirect, quality, and quantity. And then lastly, I'll just wrap up with some guidelines for sending and receiving messages. Talking about how to be an effective listener and when to and how to communicate and try to get the best results possible. So, getting into knowing your audience, you have to know your athletes have self-image. Whether you're aware of those specific um, elements or not, our athletes do have a life outside of when we have contact with them. So, an athlete's self-image is the way that the athlete views or feels about him or herself. This is acquired through all their life experiences, affected greatly by the others and actions and reactions towards them. Those that are most influential in their lives, obviously the parents, peers, and coaches kind of have a way of being able to shape their self-image positively and negatively. And it definitely has an impact on their learning because, when it comes to having the confidence and self-awareness to step outside your comfort zone and try to learn something new, it's very vulnerable. So, being aware of your athlete's self-image is critical to their ability to obtain knowledge, learn, and grow within a training or competitive environment. And I just kind of put down here effects of learning, and it's gaining knowledge and skills that can enhance an athlete's self-image. So building them up, giving them achievable tasks and goals within their training. Um, a, a poor self-image can have a negative impact on their learning and the process because of the doubt, lack of focus, and negativity. I just remember growing up and not being really good in school, and so I acted out. And there's countless stories of young boys and girls acting out in school just because they don't have the confidence or positive self-image given the current environment. So we just have to be aware of that, and not everything is what we consider surface level as relates to how our athletes interact. A functional training model as it relates to providing the consistent improvement and building them to help grow the self-efficacy and their ability to make autonomous decisions and wherewithal. Self-image as ourselves. So we have to be aware of who we are, what our expectations are. We hopefully did a little bit of that deep dive when we wrote our philosophy and coaching. But a few little tidbits here when it comes to from an administrative standpoint, I can definitely say that assumptive speech is very dangerous. So don't assume something and then create dialogue off of that. And a lot of times it stems from maybe a transactional coach, which we've talked about. But assumptive speech is not as effective because there's a lot of gaps and possibilities for misinterpretation. The hard thing with me is that um, sarcasm is a second language to me. So that's also not an effective trait. So you just have to be self aware. And sometimes I can be sarcastic, and I have to realize that in certain settings, that being sarcastic or having a sarcastic tone isn't appropriate. So we all have to, work with those constructs. Making sure that we're aware of our judgments because judgments are linked to deflection. So, usually, most of the time, when we're judging others, we have something that we're judging on ourselves. So, we just have to make sure that we're restraining ourselves from being able judging others outright, like actually saying things, or holding in internal judgments or assumptions about individuals, and then framing our mindset off that, which is going to have a correlation with how we communicate with them. Be aware of your true self. Always be true to yourself, know your morals, know your values, know what you expect, how you want people to treat you. Don't step outside of yourself for the sake of a situation. And oftentimes in sports, we see coaches compromise their value systems. So just stay true to yourself, and that can definitely be a way to know that you're going to be conveying the correct message. Keep indirect messages in context. There's times where I might be in a bad mood and I'll read an email or a text message and I'll misinterpret it from a negative perspective. And now I have this, viewpoint on how this email is being portrayed to me when I might be way off. And that happens all the time, especially now with social media, and how we're sending and receiving text messages, especially with critical information. So just be aware of that and try to keep these indirect messages in context. So, lastly, with getting to know your audience, it's about building trust. So we have to know that communication is a two-way street. We have to be effective listeners. There's a lot of strategies within our textbook that talks about the quality of listening, but at the same time, we have to teach our athletes how to communicate effectively, especially within a training setting. Coach to athlete, the coach you or as a coach, your athletes have to know that you're consistent and transparent, because if they don't, there is a lack of trust there. They will doubt you, and they won't take you at face value. Free of belittlement and judgment. So what this means is that they have to feel open to come to the coach or to the administrator. If they have a slight inkling that you might belittle them or judge them, or there might be a level of ridicule, that's going to create apprehension in being able to open up and communicate effectively. And some of us, we have to be aware, like, I don't have the most welcoming resting face. So I have to understand that I have to let my guard down, smile, because it's less intimidating for individuals that might want to open up to you that probably haven't before or haven't built that relationship yet. So we all have to be aware of our poker face and how we're portraying ourselves, even if we're not saying anything. And lastly, when it comes to coach to athlete, athletes need to believe without a doubt that the coach has the athlete's best interest in mind and that you're there for them. Because if they feel that any way that you might compromise or implore an agenda despite their best interest, they'll read that, especially as they get older and better. They'll become that much more aware of it. When it goes to athlete to coach, an athlete who is skilled in communication will learn so much better. But it's our job to teach them how to communicate. Then listening. Openness, and empathy are very important skills for the coach. Do not get frustrated. I heard a great coach say that we don't deserve to be frustrated when it comes to teaching our athletes, because um, we're frustrated because of something that we're not doing as coaches most of the time. So we have to listen, we have to be open minded, and we have to be empathetic. Requesting intrinsic information, what the athlete feels is crucial information for the coach. So we have to teach our athletes to have that internal governor to be able to dissect information, be able to internalize emotions, and have that level of emotional intelligence while in the heat of things, despite the arousal level. And then questioning the athlete, ask the athletes what they feel or what they know, be very direct, and get their feedback. And the more they communicate, the better they'll get at it. So, continuing into types of messages when it comes to effective communication within sports, there's verbal and nonverbal. Verbal is the spoken word, what they say and how they say it. Nonverbal is demonstrations, signs, gestures, body language, and possibly even one's own presence. So, it's funny because my wife always tells me I have a very bad poker face. I wear my heart on my sleeve. You can see what I'm thinking sometimes, and we have to be aware of that. The best example I can give is, as a track coach, if I have a young lady, she's high jumping, and she goes and she misses the bar, and I throw my hat down and I'm stomping and walking around and kind of throw my arms in frustration. And then she finally walks up to me and I go, "Oh yeah, don't worry, it's fine." And I'm very passive and I'm very, welcoming and reassuring in my tone, and I'm saying all the right things. But my nonverbal doesn't match my verbal, so there's a disconnect there. So we just have to make sure that we're consistent with our verbal and nonverbal communication, and just being aware that those things are essential to helping the learning process. Content versus emotion. This is effective communication should differentiate between the message that's being sent and the sender's feelings about the message. Um, Frequently in coaching, we must send a negative message, but must do so with still relating in positive feelings about the recipient. Just because you're giving criticism, they shouldn't feel criticized in the way that you think that they're breaking them down. They also use the phrase, you can be demanding without being demeaning. These are all places where you can kind of plug that in. Emotions can drastically change a message and how it is said. When the athlete is focusing on how something is said rather than what is said, the message altogether can be lost. I use, if you're a dog person or you've been around dogs, you can probably say the most, you know, um, horrifying things to a dog. But if you have a positive voice, like, "Hey, puppy, I don't like you. You're ugly," and you're very, engaging and positive, and you're upbeat, right? And you have that kind of tone, versus, um, "I love you, dog, and you're the best, and you're the cutest," and you're coming down on them and you have a very aggressive tone, but you could be saying very good things. The dog's probably going to, get in the fetal position or, kind of squirrel down. So how you're saying something definitely has to match, and we have to be aware of that. Just how we're saying it. Like I said, my sarcastic tone doesn't bode well in these circumstances, but I'm working on it. I'm getting better every day. Direct and indirect. Messages can be sent directly to the intended person or to others who may have contact with influence of the athlete. Direct messages are always recommended when important personal information is being sent or punishment is justified by the situation. One of my early mistakes is I did a performance review for my athletes, and a lot of them had went home because we already had nationals, so I emailed it. That was the worst thing I possibly could have done. And just because of the simple fact that you're talking about a direct and indirect message, those things can be lost, especially through text. Quality versus quantity. It's funny because Pastor Bayless at our church, he says you can't have quality without some quantity, and that's true. And we just have to be aware of what kind of message and how we're sending it. Just because you're saying a lot of things doesn't mean that you're saying anything at all. So the quality and quantity of our communication are very key variables in governing the effectiveness of our communication. So high quality, tell them what they need to know. This is clear and function and based truly off the coach's knowledge. Messages must be clear, precise, and meaningful. The quantity of the communication should be limited and very concise. Problems occur when messages are poorly sent, misinterpreted by the athlete, or not received at all. So we just have to make sure that, especially if it's something extremely important, we have to be very clear, concise, straight to the point, and especially if it's high quality. Quantity of information, where this comes into play, is this if it's just a list of things like, "Hey, don't forget to bring these things here." Boom, 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 boom. You can kind of list it. Another way is like if you're giving a what I call like a survey type of team meeting, and you're just kind of reevaluating or revisiting many different topics to be able to get to your main point. So getting into some guidelines for sending messages, always check, am I being clear? Make sure that you own the message. Um, do you focus on one thing at a time when you're sending this message? And is your message negative or positive? And how can you um, orchestrate it so that it's going to be the most effective? Are you consistent in your messaging of how and when you're sending these messages? Because that's also going to play a role, because we all have some anticipatory type, sentiments when it comes to receiving information from others. That's why we're always working on becoming better listeners. And so, with that, that's some tidbit inside information when it comes to communicating in sport. Um, Definitely look forward to hearing some of your guys' feedback. Other than that, have a great week. See you soon.